Hello, this is the American Presidency class. This afternoon we're going to lecture on presidents and political parties and governance. In the previous lecture set, we talked about the importance of political parties to presidential selection. Presidents also interact with political parties during their time in office. In fact, they are dependent on political parties for their leadership and for their success in accomplishing their policy agendas. The importance of political parties to executive governance can't be overstated. Let's do this more systematically. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen with my computer and go to prepared lecture slides. And we will talk for a while about presidents and political parties and executive governance. Of course, presidential leadership depends on the president's ability to mobilize support for policies and programs. And a major source of influence for the president is his ability to count on support from supportive political party constituencies and interest groups. The president has to establish a base of support to have any chance at all of success in office. And of course, a natural source of support is the president's own partisans and also naturally supportive interest groups. So here's a graph that offers a historical perspective on potential presidential support. And what we have here with this graph is party control of the House and Senate and the presidency from 1855. If you look at this graph, running along the center line of this graph is the party in the White House, the party controlling the presidency. When this center line is red, it is Republicans controlling the presidency. When it is blue, it is Democrats controlling the presidency. Above the line, above the bar in the middle of the line, we have the control of the Senate. When it is red, it is Republicans. When it is blue, it is Democrats. And below the line, we have House control of the House of Representatives. By comparing the colors of the lines associated with each of the graphs, we can see periods of unified government, unified partisan control of government, as well as divided partisan control of government. For example, between 1855 and 1857, you see unified Democratic control of the presidency, of the Senate, and the House. Starting in 1859, and then more so in 1860, we see unified control of the presidency and the Congress during 4 years of the Lincoln administration. And then Andrew Johnson becomes president. And Johnson is facing both a Republican, Johnson was a Democrat, and he's facing a Republican House and Senate. And of course, Johnson was impeached, but not convicted during this period. And then following Johnson, you see a period of unified Republican control of both the White House and both chambers of Congress, followed by intermittent control of the House by Democrats and Republicans. Then you see 16 years of Republican control of both the House and Senate, starting around 1896 and lasting until 1909, and then you see a brief period of Democratic control of both the House, Senate, and the White House. This was during the Woodrow Wilson presidency, followed by Republican control of the House and Senate for the next 16 years. Following that, you see a long period of both of Democratic control of the House and the Senate, with only just a couple of exceptions to this. Republicans control both the House and Senate starting in 1948, and then they also control both the House and Senate starting in 1953. And so these were the Eisenhower and Truman years that we're talking about. And so, but the idea here is that there was a long, long period of Democratic dominance with very few exceptions during a period of about 26 years in the Senate, 40 years in the House of Representatives. And more recently, we see Republican control of both the House and the Senate pretty much dominantly, but with intermittent periods where Democrats are in control of the House and Senate. You see this brief period during the Obama administration, just 2 years, where he had unified government. And then all of a sudden, after the midterm elections, it returns to control by Republicans in the House and subsequently Republicans in the Senate. Trump is at the last part of this graph, and you can see that Trump is now facing a Democratic House and a Republican Senate. So that gives you kind of a historical perspective on party control of both the House, Senate, and the presidency, starting in the period just prior to the Civil War. Note, however, that presidents can't always count on support from their fellow partisans, even when they are experiencing unified partisan government. A classic example of this is Bill Clinton's support for NAFTA in 1994, when the president mobilized support from the Republican side to overcome a Democratic Party majority, labor unions, and others who opposed the bill. That is to say that the North American Free Trade Agreement was a Republican issue, not a Democratic issue. Clinton, however, sided himself with the Republicans on supporting the ratification of the North American Free Trade Agreement. Recall from our earlier lecture on the nature of this agreement, it was a congressional executive agreement. So in order to overturn this agreement, you had to have agreement by both Congress and the presidency. Another example of presidents not being able to count on support from their fellow partisans occurred in 2007. George W. Bush, recognizing the severity of the economic downturn that was coming, proposed a bailout of the banking industry. The Republican Party was almost uniformly opposed to Bush's bank bailout in 2007. And so in order to get that law passed, he had to rely on supports from Democrats. Okay, we can look at this more systematically than just with these two simple examples. Here is a graph of presidential support scores in the House of Representatives from 1954 through 2018. What are presidential support scores? Congressional Quarterly, which is a publication dealing explicitly with Congress, they compile data on whether or not members of Congress are supportive of the president's program or not. And what they do is they compile a listing of bills going through Congress that the president definitively supports. And then what they do is they look at the individual members of Congress and whether or not the individual members of Congress support the president's position on this set of issues that they have identified. Then what they do is, to get this data in the graph, is they aggregate the presidential support scores across members of the political parties. Looking at the graph, what you can see is a trend. Also, you see partisan evidences here. For example, the blue line represents the Democrats in Congress, between 1953 and around 1960, you see that Democrats were supportive of President Eisenhower roughly 55% of the time. That dropped late in Eisenhower's term in 59 and 60, but you see an average of well over 50% of Democrat support for Eisenhower's policies. In contrast, if you look at the Republican support for Eisenhower's policies, it's significantly higher, taking an average between 1953 and 1954 and 1960. You see that the average of Republican support was somewhere around 70%. So the difference is between about 55 and 70. What is that? That's about 15% difference between Republican and Democrat support. You can see from this that Eisenhower was fairly consensual in his mode of governing. Okay, enter John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, and you see that for Kennedy and Johnson, you see an average of over 80% support for Kennedy and Johnson's policies, but you see Republican support drop off quite sharply to around 40, in the mid 40% for the Johnson and Kennedy policies. And then following that, you see the Nixon administration, where the difference declines until late in the Nixon administration. And you see even Republicans are less supportive of Nixon during the latter part of the Nixon administration. Move from there to the Carter administration. You see the Carter support from his own party was around 70%. Support from the opposing party was only about 40%. And then move from there into the Reagan administration. You see increasing polarization with the Republican support for Reagan's policies, Reagan's stated positions, being somewhere around 70%, but Democrat support for Reagan's policies dropped off very sharply to around 30%, a little more than 30%. Follow this by the Clinton administration, and what you see is even more polarization, with Democrats more supportive of the Clinton agenda and Republicans somewhat less supportive of the Clinton agenda. Segue from there into the George W. Bush administration, you see sharply increasing polarization, with Republicans supporting George W. Bush about 85% of the time, but Democrats supporting George W. Bush more about 25% of the time. And so by the end of the George W. Bush administration, you see Democrat support drop off very sharply to around, to actually less than 10% in 2007 and less than 20% in 2008. This, of course, is followed by the Obama administration, and you see a continuation of polarization during the Obama administration, with Democrats supporting Obama about 85% of the time, as had occurred during the George W. Bush administration for Republicans, and support for Obama among Republicans fell sharply every year when Obama was still president. And then, of course, the Trump administration during the first 2 years, you see very high public support, partisan support for Trump, well over 90% for the first 2 years. And, but Democrat support for Trump is extremely low, less than 5% in 2017, 2018. So presidential support scores offers us a take on how supportive the president's fellow partisans have been of the president's agenda through time. One thing to take away from this graph is the trend lines showing increasing party polarization through time. So that graph suggests that presidents can count on support largely from their fellow partisans in Congress but not all the time. The trends through time, again, reflecting increasing party polarization. With party polarization, the Trump presidency saw greater cohesion among Republicans and significantly more opposition by Democrats. Indeed, political parties and interest groups can impede presidential leadership efforts when they view things from a different perspective. And thus, Bill Clinton in 1994 was not successful in pressing the issue of healthcare reform, despite the fact that very large majorities of Americans favored healthcare reform. And partisan and group interests mobilized against the president's plan in 1994 in opposition actually to public opinion. Okay, thinking about political parties more broadly, in the previous lecture sequence, we talked about the importance of parties to selecting the president. We noted that parties emerged by 1800 in response to greater suffrage rights for Americans. Parties evolved as communication and patronage mechanisms for electing the president, starting with the Jackson presidency and the era of patronage system. Parties were and are very broad aggregations of interests that are intended to capture the election. There is a theory that was dominant in political science and maybe even still is in some segments of political science called the Downesian theory. And the Downesian view is that political parties alter their policy positions in a policy space in order to win elections. So in other words, they'll move to the left or the right in an effort to optimize party support. Okay, under Downes's theory, we have something called the median voter. This is at the direct center of public issue preferences. It's called the median voter. It's the voter who's right in the middle of citizen preferences. The party of the left, which in our country is the Democratic Party, has a preferred policy position. Downes calls this the left party ideal point. The party on the right, which in our country is the Republican Party, has a right party ideal point. If you play a game here and you see where the party must position itself to win a majority of the electorate in elections, what you will observe from this is that a bigger, if the left party only appeals to its own ideal point, it's going to attract those on the left, but it may not attract those on the right, because the right party will attract everyone from the far right of the distribution all the way into the left party's segment to the left of the median voter. So the idea that Downes presents, using a sort of a game perspective, is that the median voter is the center point. Both parties tend to move toward the center in order to capture more of the vote in order to win the election. So the Downesian view is something that has dominated the thinking of political scientists in their studies of political parties for quite a number of years, especially those espousing the rational choice approach. The model seems largely inappropriate, however, given party behaviors in the age of polarization. Parties have appeared in the age of polarization to move toward these extremes rather than the middle, especially the Republican Party. In a sense, this may also be rational. It is the party loyalists at the extremes who are most motivated to vote in elections and to contribute to the party through money and other forms of participation. In other words, those at the extremes are more zealous supporters of the party and therefore more likely to vote and more likely to contribute in various ways to the political party. Either way, whether it is the Downesian way or parties moving toward the extremes, political parties are broader representation mechanisms than are interest groups. Regardless, both parties and interest groups can be viewed as primarily self-interested entities with goals that are not fully consistent with the national interest defined broadly. What do we mean by defined broadly? What we mean is that the national interest would be in the interest of everybody in the nation, so that the median citizen is the one who benefits most from the party's policies and priorities. Also, both parties are self-interested, and that self-interest may not be fully consistent with everybody's best interest. For example, if we think about Republicans, Republicans are well known to favor business interests, and they're well known to favor the elites in the country, and of course, espousing a set of policies that is more favorable to business interests and to elite interests is not consistent with the median citizen. Likewise, if we think about the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party tends to reflect the preferences of labor unions, those on the left of the policy preference continuum that Downs suggested there. And so if the party adheres to views of the left, it's going to be leaving out people in the middle who don't really care about liberal preferences. And so either way, the political parties, as self-interested entities, may pursue goals that are not fully consistent with the nation's interest. Okay, thinking about presidential leadership of parties, an incumbent president represents broad and diverse interests, or at least should. So a question in democratic theory concerns whether the president just represents those who elected him or the interests of the nation at large. This was the major research question of my book, The Myth of Presidential Representation. In my book on the myth of presidential representation, my core finding was that presidents tend to represent the interests of those who elected him rather than the interest of the nation at large. In other words, presidents are partisans rather than centrists in their mode of representation. Regardless of the president's role in democratic representation, the president always wants party support. Party support is a resource that presidents need in order to be successful in governing, in leading. An incumbent president is usually viewed as the symbolic leader of his political party. The non-incumbent party, that is the party that does not hold the presidency, is typically leaderless during the period of non-incumbency. Various people will vie for the title of party leader during the time that they are outside of the presidency. But none typically succeeds. We might ask, who is the current leader of the Republican Party? Well, the answer is pretty clear. It is the Republican president. While the president is leader of his political party, there are obstacles to presidential leadership. Party discipline is difficult to enforce due to changes in the party system that we talked about earlier. Candidate-centered elections rather than party-centered elections. Presidents are not beholden to the party for their election. Similarly, members of Congress are generally on their own in getting elected to Congress. We don't have a responsible party system as occurs in Europe and much of the rest of the world, as we showed by the preceding graphs. Presidents and their political parties also have different organizational needs. Presidents seek loyalty to their administration, while political parties want to disperse benefits across diverse constituencies. Presidents and their parties may also have different time horizons. Parties last for many decades and indeed even centuries. The Republican Party started in 1854. the Democratic Party started in 1828. In contrast, presidents serve only for 4 or 8 years. So they may be thinking differently in terms of long-term versus short-term. As we talked about earlier, through time, there have been various reforms that have weakened the effect of political parties and on the president's ability to lead. These include, as we discussed in the prior lectures, party reforms and resulting primary elections, candidate-centered elections, and campaign finance limitations. Other changes that have weakened presidential influence over parties relate to changes in Congress. A weakening of the reward system in Congress and the decline of seniority has been important there. Party leaders are now elected in caucus rather than on the basis of seniority. The evolution of subcommittee government and the dispersion of power in Congress. Congress has become increasingly fragmented by the evolution of subcommittee government. The president's program is now subject to more cross-cutting influences in Congress. Multiple committees are responsible for most policies. All of this means that it has become more difficult for presidents to pass their programs. Presidential initiatives can be blocked by, first, the leadership in Congress, second, the committee and subcommittee chairs, third, the rules committees, fourth, the finance committees if the president's program requires money, and so forth. You can see the idea is that, that there are multiple points at which the president's initiatives can be blocked in Congress due to decentralization in Congress. The increased number of roll call votes due to electronic voting makes position taking more visible and subject to constituent scrutiny. Higher visibility for voting decisions has occurred. The opening of committee hearings to the public have also increased visibility. So if the public is seeking, if the president is seeking a matter that might not be beneficial to all constituents, note that the members of Congress are more visible and their constituents become more aware of their support for policies that are not beneficial to them. So this makes it more difficult for presidents to secure votes on roll calls. Then finally here, a new breed of legislator has become less susceptible to presidential leadership. They have been anti-Washington in their outlook. For example, the Tea Party is important in thinking about this. While presidential leadership is not assured, the president does bring some assets to the game. Presidential coattail effects can produce those who are beholden to the president. So sometimes presidents campaign for other elected officials. This, of course, is not always effective. Indeed, presidents can be asked to stay out of elections if the president is not very popular. However, there are some very strong regularities associated with presidential elections and with midterm elections. Okay, look at these slides. Here, what we have is a bar chart of the seats won and lost in presidential election years, starting in 1932. The green bars represent the House seats, and the pinkish bars represent the Senate seats. You can see that the 1932 election was a huge landslide for Franklin Roosevelt, and that he built on that landslide in 1936. And he lost a couple of Senate seats in 1940, but then you can see that with World War II, he really built strongly on his House majority and lost a couple more seats in the Senate in 1944. Follow that by Harry Truman, and what you observe with Harry Truman is, again, a huge landslide for Harry Truman in the House in 1948. In the House, Truman's political party, the Democrats, gained around 75 seats. They also gained a number of Senate seats. Okay, a pattern is beginning to emerge here. You can see that most of the time, I say most of the time, but not all the time, the president's party wins seats during presidential election years. There are exceptions here. Dwight Eisenhower lost seats in both houses in 1956. John Kennedy lost House seats in 1960. Richard Nixon lost a Senate seat or two in 1972. And then segue forward through time to Ronald Reagan in the 1996 election. Reagan gained House seats but lost Senate seats. Indeed, the loss of those Senate seats meant sort of the death knell of the Reagan agenda from that on out. George W. Bush lost a few seats in the House, but nothing in the Senate. That's George H.W. Bush, rather. Clinton lost House seats in both presidential elections. So did George W. Bush in his first, but not in his second presidential election. Obama won House and Senate seats in 2008 and 2012, but Donald J. Trump lost House seats and Senate seats in 2016, making control of the House and Senate more precarious for Trump. A more definitive pattern is shown when we look at seats won and lost in midterm elections. If you look at this, it is an astounding pattern to see that presidents virtually always lose seats in midterm elections. The exception, Franklin Roosevelt, Kennedy in the 1962 midterm elections lost a couple of Senate seats. So did Nixon. So did Reagan. Clinton lost House. I'm sorry, he gained House seats in 1994 and 1998. But the pattern here is really, really striking in the sense that these losses in midterm elections are usually quite large. By comparison, Donald J. Trump's losses in the midterm elections for the House are nowhere near as large as Barack Obama lost, and Clinton lost, Jerry Ford, Lyndon Johnson, Dwight Eisenhower, Harry Truman, Franklin Roosevelt. Virtually always the incumbent president loses seats in midterm elections. So the president's party generally, but not always, wins seats in both houses of Congress in presidential election years. The president's party virtually always loses seats in midterm election years. These regularities suggest that presidents need to act early in their terms in order to have any hope of success in passing their policy agendas. Presidents are lame ducks in the second half of their four-year terms. And if they are lucky enough to be reelected, they become lame ducks for the second term. Presidential coattails give the president influence during the early parts of a presidency. However, presidents also have other resources for gaining party loyalty beyond presidential coattails. Having the ear of the president can build prestige and standing among the president's fellow partisans. And so presidents issue symbolic things for fellow partisans. They issue invitations, they hold meetings with them, and they manipulate symbols. Casework is also an important advantage for the presidency. Members of Congress are frequently wanting things done for their constituents whether that's a senator wanting things done for his state, or a member of the House wanting things done for members of his constituency in his home district. And so presidents, through their control of the bureaucracy, are in a position to deal with casework that can bring loyalty from members of the House and Senate. More broadly, presidential visibility can affect the image of the party for many, many years to come. Presidents typically share beliefs with members of their own party, and this engenders loyalty through rhetoric. While patronage, such as existed in the 19th century, is a thing of the past, presidents do have some control of political appointments and federal jobs. So through appointing party loyalists to administration positions, the president gains loyalty within the administration and also builds loyalty with the political party more generally. Presidents also build loyalty by raising money for the political parties and party candidates through public appearances and through appeals. Presidents also influence the party organization. They usually select the chair of the party organization, either the Republican National Committee or the Democratic National Committee. I've got hot links there to descriptions of the roles that these committees play in party politics. Presidents also affect party platforms and rules. As you can see, we reached the end of the prepared lecture slides on political parties and executive governance. We'll take a short break and continue this session with a discussion of interest groups and executive governance. So I'll stop here for just a few minutes.